We gaan luisteren naar onze tweede spreker. Our second speaker is de professor uit Zweden, Björn Stigson. Voor hem graag uw applaus.
Your Royal Highness, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. And thank you for the invitation to be here with you this afternoon. I'm going to give a global business perspective on the theme of creating tomorrow. And I'm basing it on the work of the World Business Council for Sustainable Development. 200 of the world's biggest corporations and their chief executives. 7 are actually Dutch. We also, in the World Business Council, have a network with 60 national organizations. The theme of today is creating tomorrow. And if we look at tomorrow, you heard numbers on population. We will increase up to 2050 with about a third more people. But the most interesting number, I think, is the fact that the new people will be born in what we call emerging economies. And by 2050, 85% of the world's population will be living in what we call emerging economies today. 15% is the old world: Europe, North America, Japan, and Australia. And the focus in these emerging economies is one, and that is to reduce poverty and improve quality of life in all aspects. Here are just 4 aspects, but we could make a much longer list. And this focus will continue to be the focus up to 2050. We have heard the word urbanization. We believe we are going to be urbanized to 70% by 2050. In absolute numbers, this means that over 40 years, we are going to go from 3 billion people to 6 billion people living in cities. A little bit simplified, we're going to build as much urban infrastructure over the next 40 years as we built in the history of mankind. And that's primarily in these gray areas, in Asia and in Africa. The result of these very simple trends, more people focus on higher living standards and urbanization, means that the economic growth will continue to be faster in the emerging economies. And already 2025, we expect that more than 60% of the GDP is in these emerging economies. So when I look at these simple trends, I see inevitably a world which will be in transition to sustainability. We will have changes in the economy, we will have changes in society, the environment will be under pressure. We are struggling with finding ways on how we are going to govern this world to deal with these challenges. And we're also struggling with finding sufficient skills and people that actually can deal with implementation. Now, the leading economies of this world have realized that this is what the world looks like, what I have described. And since a few years, there is what I've called a green race going on, a green competition about who are going to be the leading suppliers of resource-efficient, low-polluting solutions that the future markets will inevitably be requesting. And if you want to win this green race, either as a company or as a country, then you have to transform your activity. If you're a country, you have to transform your home market and create demands for these type of resource-efficient solutions. And thereby, you build the domestic demand, you build competencies, and that becomes the platform for exports. The country that is taking the lead in the green race is China. This is a key component of their present 5-year plan. I have myself been an advisor to the State Council, the top Chinese leadership, for 16 years on these matters. And the Chinese are extremely dedicated to win the green race. We have got the US. The US is the most innovative economy. But if you want these innovations to penetrate your market, you must have policies that support that. Otherwise, it's too slow. and you have the political regulatory deadlock in the US. So the innovations are not really penetrating the market in the US at the speed that it potentially could. Then we have new things that pop up, like the shale gas revolution. As you know, this is a very recent revolution that has a fundamental impact on the whole energy market and US society. And not only on the US society, it has got fundamental impacts on, for instance, Europe as well. The EU is market leader today on green technology exports, with about 30% global market share, but half of that is Germany. And Germany is growing, and the rest of the EU is not. And in my view, the transformation of the internal market in the EU is too slow for the EU to maintain that 30% global market share. The biggest thing that happens in Europe at the moment in this green race is the energy transformation in Germany, the Energiewende, which is very substantial. It's well intended, but it's also got a lot of unintended consequences, and some of them I think you are suffering from in Holland as well. We have, in the World Business Council, been looking at how did we see the world going forward. And in 2004-05, I gathered a group of chief executives to try to think through what is the role of business in tomorrow's society, and they came up with a report. And what they wrote in this report, you can see here, where they say, we believe that the leading global companies of 2020 will be those that provide goods and services and reach new customers in ways that address the world's major challenges, including poverty, climate change, resource depletion, globalization, and demographic shifts. And one of the co-chairs for that was a Dutchman, Paul Polman, who is now, as you know, head of Unilever. A couple of years later, we said we need a longer vision and a more substantive vision for this future world, and a vision from a business perspective that could be a platform for a dialogue with the rest of the society. And about 30 of our member companies got engaged, and they developed this vision, 9 billion people living well within the limits of the planet. Now, what does that mean? Well, this chart is trying to explain that. On the horizontal axis, you have basically living standard, the way United Nations measure it. And on the vertical axis, you have resource use, ecological footprint. There are two mega changes that needs to happen in the global society going forward. The dots are countries. And the dots on the left-hand side there, they are these emerging economies that by 2050 will represent 85% of the world's population. And the traditional development path is the red arrow that you see there. When countries come to a certain living standard, they increase their resource use substantially. If these 85% of the world's population go down that track with that arrow, forget about a sustainable world. Then we have the other arrow there, or dots, the rich countries. And the rich countries need to find a way to maintain good living standards, but a much lower resource intensity than what we have today. So these are the two big mega challenges that we are trying to address in the global society. What these companies did as well was that they developed a pathway. And I don't expect you to be able to read the details. I'm just telling you the principle. What they did was they divided up society and the economy into 9 elements, from soft issues like people's values to hard issues like buildings and materials. And then they said, is it possible to imagine a sustainable world by 2050 in these different elements? And what would it look like? And if we are here today, what are the transformations, the changes that we must go through over these 40 years up to 2050 to have a sustainable world? And they asked themselves the question, is this possible? And they said, yes, we believe it is possible, provided there is political will to drive these transformations. Technologically, we believe it can be done, but is there political will to really change society to that extent? And what the companies were also saying was that when they looked at the business opportunities in these transformations, they said, this is the biggest business opportunity we have ever seen in the modern history of business and industry. And for those that get it, will have a tremendous potential going forward. For those that don't get it, they will be doing something else. Then in 2012, we published another report that we call Changing Pace. And we said, we don't believe that business can do this on its own. So what kind of policies do we need from governments to scale up and accelerate business action, if we believe that we have a number of the solutions? And now, this year, the World Business Council is working on another report, looking more short-term at what are the actions that we can put in place more short-term. A few words about some of the challenges that I see over the next decade. I've already talked about the green race, so I don't think I need to say much more about that. The second is, what is the role of business in a world which is resource and pollution constrained? And we have two issues that we're dealing with at the moment that are mega issues for business. The first is the challenge to short-term market capitalism coming from the financial crisis. And the big issue, how do we get the financial sector back under societal control in some form or fashion? And the other is business role in achieving sustainable lifestyles and consumption patterns. We are pretty good at selling more stuff, but in a world where we need to change lifestyles and consumption patterns, what does that mean for business? What is our role in doing that? The third issue, the governance of global ecosystems. Whose responsibility is it? Who's going to pay for what? We see the problems in the climate negotiations now going on in Poland. And how do we share access to natural resources, like water, and that Pavel talked about? There are 5 big rivers in Asia that is fundamental to the whole of Asia, and they all start up in Tibet. And China is building dams in Tibet. So how is that going to play out? How do we share the access to these resources? And the fourth is growing social tensions. We have become richer overall in the world with globalization, but we haven't shared the growth very equitably. So there are bigger inequalities today, both inside countries and between countries, than what we had before. We have the challenges to societal services because of the public finances, the austerity measures. And we have intergenerational tensions around jobs, education, pensions, and healthcare. And let me illustrate that a little bit. The blue line that you see to the left there are people above 65. There are today about 450 million people above 65. 2050, we expect it's going to be 1.6 billion. The cost of taking care of old age, healthcare, pensions, as percent of GDP, you can see here. In 2010, Germany 20%, France 25%, China 4%, US 10%. You see the enormous impact that this has on competitiveness between countries. But you can also see that with the present policies and with the more older people, up to 2050, this will come closer to 30% in many countries. And I don't believe that the younger generations are going to accept to pay 30% of GDP for taking care of old people. This is, to me, one of the real big sustainability issues, the tensions between generations going forward. We have on top of this the issue about changes in workforces in a number of countries. Germany has today, a little bit uncertain exactly the number, but say between 42 and 45 million people in the workforce. Over the next 15 years, Germany is going to lose 6.5 million people in its workforce because of low birth rates and because of old age. And these are, of course, people that are very skilled and experienced. This is going to be a tremendous problem for Germany. And Japan has a similar trend. I believe, like Pavel was saying, we need new public-private partnerships going forward between governments and business on different levels, business to business in sectors and in organizations like the World Business Council, with civil society to establish trust for trade-offs and transformations, and also support local activities, and with science and academia to build knowledge and skills for implementation. No part of society can fix this on their own. It has to happen in new types of partnerships. Now, for us in business, and the reason we have been engaging in these issues is that we early on in the life of World Business Council said, business cannot succeed in a society that fails. And then we said, okay, but what does that mean? We cannot take over the role of government, but what is our role in helping societies to succeed? And we also have been saying the global society cannot succeed without business as a solution provider. So we have to be active in this game as global companies and help drive solutions and work in partnerships with other parts of society. So that's my story from a business perspective about creating tomorrow. We have a few challenges in creating tomorrow. It will not be done by its own. It will certainly take an enormous amount of transformations, political will, and investments. But we believe from global business it is possible. It can be done if we work together, all of us, to achieve this. So I think I've used up 17 of my 18 minutes that I was allocated to tell you about how do we create tomorrow. So I've saved 47 seconds for further ideas. So thank you very much.
Professor Björn Stigson, thank you very much.